Some of the deviant workplace behaviors that we are seeing, some of the counterproductive behaviors that we are seeing, the stealing, the gossiping, the rumors, all of those, many times, those are a way employees use to retaliate because they feel like the employer has breached the psychological contract. Those of you who are listeners and viewers from outside of South Africa, when you say Eitawola Shapagunjani, if you ever go to South Africa, just say that. Just act cool. It's one of the coolest greetings you can ever do. Welcome to another episode of Organizational Behavior with Siphiwe Moyo. In case you are new here, I'm your host with the most. My name is Siphiwe Moyo. I wanted to tell you a bit of a story. About a year ago, I received a call to visit one of my favorite cities in the Southern African region. Maybe let the city remain anonymous. You never know. Maybe clients might feel like I am not acting very professional. So we'll keep it anonymous. Is that fine? So the purpose of my visit was to motivate a team at a client's organization who was experiencing some challenges, right? Before I generally work with clients, we have this briefing meeting when we chat about what they want me to do. So during our briefing meeting, the client was outlining some of the challenges that they were having. So things like lack of communication, resistance to change, and low morale. So they wanted me to come and give a motivational talk, which is something that I do very well. Extremely well. But so while we were chatting with the client, I realized that I think, when he was outlining these challenges, I realized that maybe delivering a motivational talk might not be enough to address the underlying issues that I was observing. I think instead I decided to take a different approach. I gently introduced the client to two critical organizational behavior concepts that could help shed a light to why they were experiencing the stuff that they were experiencing. So I wanted to push him to understanding the root causes of the team's challenges. So I proposed an in-depth conversation and discussion with both employees and managers, focusing on understanding their perspectives and try to uncover some of the reasons behind their behavior. So for me, it became very clear that the employees were experiencing some kind of a disconnect between what we normally refer to in organizational behavior as a perceived breach of the psychological contract, and I'll explain what that is. And so there was this gap between the perceived breach of psychological contract and the organization. So by delving deeper into their concerns and addressing the underlying issues, we then worked towards building a stronger foundation of trust and collaboration with the team. So today, in this particular podcast entry, and I'm flying solo again, we're going to delve deeper into two important organizational behavior constructs. The one is called deviant workplace behaviors, or DWB as we call it, and the second one is the perceived breach of psychological contract. And it's very interesting. We'll explore the intricate relationship between these two, because if you understand these two and the link between the perceived breach of psychological contract and deviant workplace behaviors, on the other hand, you'll be able to understand the impact of this stuff on workplace dynamics. So what are those? I know it sounds like some jargon, but really they're very, very simple. Let's start with workplace deviant behaviors. What are those? Sometimes we call them deviant behaviors or workplace deviants. So let's talk about those. I think deviant workplace behaviors encompasses a wide range of intentional, and please note the word intentional, behaviors that deviate from organizational norms. So counterproductive behaviors that sometimes we believe we start seeing in the workplace, which can really harm the organization and its members. And some of these definitions come from Robinson and Bennett in the studies that they've done. So these behaviors disrupt the smooth functioning of the organization and can have severe repercussions on employee morale. So what are some of the things that we can see? When we're starting having rumors in the workplace, bullying, in the workplace, and all those sorts of things. Those are what we call workplace deviant workplace behaviors. I want to list a few and explain a few of them, that you might start realizing that maybe the reason we're seeing those workplace deviant behaviors is somehow linked to the perceived breaches of psychological contract, which for me, when I tried to explain this to a client, and the client was got an aha moment and like, wow, I think we're really struggling with this. So what are some of the deviant workplace behaviors we see in the workplace? Theft. When people start just engaging in theft, they are stealing. Sometimes people steal in the workplace as a retaliation of what they believe is a breach of the psychological contract. When you grow up in the townships of South Africa, people use the words, melu umuntu athole isinkwa, that is spanning. Which basically mean I must steal because the employer is not paying me enough. And so there's a lot of people who are stealing in the workplace because they are, in their minds, there's some breach of the psychological contract from the employer side, and we'll explore this. Sometimes we see a lot of workplace bullying and harassment. Yo, guys, what has happened with workplace bullying? There's an increase in workplace bullying, anecdotal evidence, which means I haven't done a study, but there's just an increase in workplace bullying these days. Workplaces are becoming places where we're bullying each other, we're harassing each other. And I want to argue that when we want to get into the deep and the root of what is happening, we will be able to explain it through the perceived breaches of the psychological contract. There's a lot of gossiping and spreading rumors. Yo. Hey. Workplaces have become places where people are gossiping, spreading rumors about the other. It's like a soap opera. It's like Days of Our Lives, the bold and the beautiful in the workplace right now. So-and-so said this, so-and-so said this. Do you know why this one? So there's a lot of that, and we'll explore why I think that is happening. Once you see sabotaging, saboteurs in the workplace, where people are sabotaging the colleagues' work, once you see cyber sabotage and hacking and violating company policies and procedures, there are people who are intentionally violating policies and procedures, falsifying documents, taking credit for other people's work. Do you see a lot of that? Engaging in counterproductive workplace behaviors where I'm holding information, I'm surfing the internet all the time, I'm basically at work, but I'm not at work. Like my mind. What is that song? I like that song, but I cannot remember. My body's here, but my mind. Okay, let's leave that. I don't think it's even appropriate. Is that song sang by that dude? Delete. Where people are misusing company resources or they're misusing company time. So when people are doing this, ladies and gentlemen, they justify it. In their mind, they justify it and they're retaliating against what they believe are the breaches of the psychological contract between the employer and the employee. So what is this perceived psychological contract breaches? The word psychological contract in organizational behavior is that implicit, unspoken agreement between employees and their organizations that outlines mutual expectations and obligations. When I decide to bring my labor into the workplace, there's a few things that I'm expecting the employer to do. And once I perceive this breach of this psychological contract, I feel like the employer is not meeting its end of the bargain. That's what the psychological contract breaches are all about. And these breaches, they occur when employees believe that the employer has failed to fulfill its side of the agreement, leading to feelings of betrayal. So we have a lot of people in the workplace who feel betrayed by the employer. It leads to a lot of disillusionment. People are disillusioned by what they're experiencing. Examples of these perceived breaches, unmet expectations of career advancement. So for example, there are certain people who believed they were overlooked for career advancement, overlooked for promotion. So even their demeanor has changed. this person used to be so motivated, bringing their A game to work. Suddenly it has changed. And what is happening is that because they believe there's been a perceived breach of the psychological contract, because I was supposed to be promoted, I deserved this promotion. So this particular person is now in retaliation mode. So lack of recognition, the unequal treatment in the workplace, all of these perceived breaches of the psychological contract can lead to someone retaliating, withdrawing their labor intentionally, or at least slowing down in terms of their labor because they feel like the employer has not met its end of the bargain. So let me list some of the common perceived psychological breaches that happen in the workplace. So firstly, when I think that there's been an unfair treatment or favoritism in the workplace, if you can look at many employees, they are going around with a certain disillusionment, they're going around with harboring a lot of resentment, a lot of disappointment with regards to unfair treatment or favoritism in the workplace. They believe that some employers, some managers have their blue-eyed boy and the blue-eyed girl, and because of that disillusionment and that resentment, you start realizing that's the reason that people are showing a lot of these deviant behaviors. So if they believe that there's a lack of recognition or appreciation of their work, they're not appreciated enough, they're not recognized enough, or they work hard but nobody cares and nobody sees their contribution, you can tell that these people are filled with that disillusionment. Sometimes they feel there has been a lack of or promotional opportunities or career advancement opportunities. There's always gossip and rumors about so-and-so is always favored for career advancement, so-and-so is always favored for development opportunities. And when those things happen, people are withdrawing their labor. So they feel there's inconsistent communication from managers, that managers are communicating to their favorites and not to everybody else. When they feel like there's no safe and healthy work environment, both physical safety and psychological safety, when they feel like I cannot be able to voice whatever I'm feeling anyway, what they end up doing is retaliating. When they feel like there's no regard for work-life balance, that their managers are calling them at any time on a Sunday, they have no regard at all for work-life balance, they don't care about their families and so on, they can get into deviant behaviors. So ignoring the employee feedback. This is a big one, guys. This is a big one. I remember a few months ago, I was going to facilitate one of the employee values sessions. So every employer has some values, and then they try and turn those values into some behaviors that employees and managers can live by. And so they had invited me to try and turn the values into some behaviors, and I was there to facilitate. And I remember on that particular day, I was flying to a place in the Northern Cape, and because it was in the Northern Cape, I didn't want to hire a car. I ended up going to the venue through a staff shuttle, right? Which meant I spent a lot of time with the employees. And while we were spending a lot of time with the employees, I realized that there's some disillusionment. People do not believe that sessions like the one I was about to facilitate are worthwhile. They don't think there's a follow-through. They think they're a waste of time. They think they're a tick-box exercise. And you realize that once people feel that even the sessions that we have, even the stuff that we do, employers, managers will ignore the feedback, will ignore the suggestions. They then withdraw their labor, and they're in this retaliation mode that because they believe it's not going to help anyway. So when there also has been some changes in job responsibilities without consultation, sometimes people become resentful of those changes, and they show it in these deviant behaviors. So not fulfilling promises made during the recruitment process as well, because talent acquisition specialists, they sell, hey? They sell so well. When I was working for one of the banks, I was head of litigant development, and my colleagues in the talent acquisition space sat very close to me. So we had an open plan environment, and one of the heads of talent acquisitions was very close to me physically. And And that person used to sell the organization so well. When people are recruiting new, they sell the organization. They use words like, this is a strategic opportunity. It's not operational. And oh my word. And then when you get there, you realize that there's nothing strategic there. It's nothing strategic. So if there is a gap between what was promised in the recruitment process and what I'm seeing once I am in the role, there will be some resentment that I'm harboring, and that's one of the breaches of the psychological contract. And then maybe lastly, there could be many, but lastly, when there's a lack of transparency in decision-making processes, and in my view, there's an expectation for you to be transparent as a leader, as a manager, there is then that perceived breach of the psychological contract. So a psychological contract in basic terms then is that expectations that I have as an employee that are unwritten, but that are generic, that are generally accepted expectations. If I feel like the employer is not meeting the ends of the bargain, that is what we call perceived breaches in psychological contracts. So my argument and the assertion, when we edit this video, this is what we're gonna use as the promo, ne? I'm telling the producers, ne. So the assertion that I want to make in this episode is that some of the deviant workplace behaviors that we are seeing, some of the counterproductive behaviors that we are seeing, the stealing, the gossiping, the rumors, all of those, many times, those are a way employees use to retaliate because they feel like the employer has breached the psychological contract. So that's the assertion that we're making in this podcast. But it's not just an assertion. It's not just anecdotal. When you do these episodes, you must always hoy these big terms like anecdotal, empirical, so that we are listening to organizational behavior with Siphiwe Moyo. Research studies there's been a lot of studies that have found the link between the perceived breaches of the psychological contract and deviant workplace behaviors. I think in organizational behaviors, one of those things that was settled many years ago, there's been numerous studies that have underscored the strong connection between perceived psychological contract breaches and deviant workplace behaviors. For instance, Morrison and Robinson's already in 1997, which is a long time ago, found that employees who perceived a breach in their psychological contract were more likely to engage in acts of sabotage and workplace deviance. And similarly, Tenley and Fieldman in 1999 already observed a direct correlation between perceived breaches of psychological contract and counterproductive workplace behaviors such as absenteeism and theft. So I think there's been sufficient evidence for this link to be established. But now that we know that sometimes the reason we're seeing these workplace deviant behaviors is because people are in retaliation mode, these acts of sabotage, these acts of workplace deviance, some of the counterproductive workplace behaviors like absenteeism and theft, that now that we know, they sometimes emanate from the fact that we believe, as employees believe, that there's been the breaches in the psychological contract. We need to find some moderating variables then between these two, right? And I think there are certain moderating variables that can influence the strength of the relationship between deviant workplace behaviors on the one hand and the perceived breaches in psychological contract on the other. So constructs such as organizational justice can act as a buffer against the negative effects of the breaches of psychological contract on employee behavior, found Morrison and Robinson. Additionally, employees' resilience, their own ability to bounce back after setbacks, has been identified as a critical factor in mitigating the impact of perceived psychological contract breaches on counterproductive behavior. And that particular research was done by Resterbach et al. In 2007. I love adding et al. In everything. I think I once said this in this podcast, that when you go on a first date, you must always hold your words like et al. Just see if someone has visited university, even if it's for 1 week. Okay, guys, I'm joking. It's just I always want to hoy a joke or two. All right, so I think I've established what deviant workplace behaviors are. I've explained what the perceived psychological contract breaches are. And now I want to finish this podcast entry with recommendations for leaders and employees. So what can you do from the employee side and from the employer side? Let's start with employees. I think, as employees, once you get into the point where you're angry, you're bitter, you're disillusioned because you believe that there are breaches in the psychological contract, I think going and establishing and showing workplace deviance is not the best solution. I understand why you end up doing theft, bullying, and all of those deviant behaviors that I've spoken about, but it's not the best way. I don't want to lie. Let me give you some of the things you can do as an employee if you feel like the employer is not listening and they've breached the psychological contract. Instead of showing these deviant behaviors, there are a few things that I think you can do. Firstly, open communication. So I feel like employees should feel comfortable expressing their concerns and feedback to their supervisors, or at least the HR department, in a constructive and professional manner. Obviously, this is contingent on the famous psychological safety, that whether there's a safe environment for you to even raise those issues. But where you believe there is, speak to your manager, speak to your HR department to raise these issues. I think it's a good start. Secondly, always seek clarification. Is there a bit of a misunderstanding maybe, or confusion about expectations? Employees, I think, should seek clarification from their supervisors or managers, because this is a relationship like any other. I don't know how many times we've clashed with my wife because of the expectations that I had in my own head, or the expectations that she had in her own head. And now we are fighting because of unmet expectations that were not communicated. Unmet expectations that have not been communicated has led to a lot of disagreement and bitterness in many a relationship. But that is not helpful, because I cannot read your mind, you cannot read my mind. So please, let's seek clarification when we believe that some of our expectations are unmet. Thirdly, I think focus on solutions. Instead of just complaining about perceived breaches of the psychological contract, employees should focus on finding these solutions and working collaboratively with management to address these issues. Yes, you must raise the issues, but instead of withdrawing your labor and engaging in workplace deviance, it would be better to co-create solutions as team members and managers. Number 4, professional development. Employees, at the end of the day, must take initiative in their own professional development by seeking opportunities for training, upskilling, raise your hand, or career advancement while within the organization. Sometimes it's a matter of raising your hand. Sometimes it's a matter of knowing what is happening in other divisions, in other units, in other departments, and just navigate yourself outside of that particular space that you are not comfortable with. Sometimes there are subcultures in many organizations. So sometimes maybe you are, resentful, or you lack morale for that particular department. Sometimes you need to raise your hand and find your own space in another department if you feel like some of the other things I've suggested have been ignored. Establishing boundaries is very important as well. Setting clear boundaries around work responsibilities, work hours, and personal time can help maintain a healthy work-life balance. Remember, one of the perceived psychological contract breaches is when you feel there's a disregard for your work-life balance. But instead of withdrawing your labor and ending up committing deviant behaviors, you can raise the issue and establish boundaries and say, I will look at this particular email on Monday, and so on. And establishing boundaries can actually help us. Number 7, seeking support. Employees can seek support from HR, from employee assistance programs. Every employer, particularly middle-sized and large employer, they will have what we call EAP programs or other resources within an organization to address any issues you might be facing. And then take care of your well-being. This is very important. While you're trying to fight some of the internal battles that you're fighting in the organization, please take care of yourself. Taking care of your physical and mental well-being through regular exercise, healthy eating, and can help you cope with workplace challenges more effectively while you are trying more permanent solutions. It's very important to try and look after yourself. Advocate for change. Take responsibility. If there are any systemic issues affecting multiple employees, employees can work together to advocate for change within the organization through formal channels or employee representation. So if there's a representative of employees, maybe you can organize, as we say in South Africa, and raise those issues. Consider other options as well. If the perceived breaches cannot be resolved within the organization, employees may need to consider other job opportunities that align better with their values and expectations. You know, I say this all the time, and this one goes to one of our shorts on TikTok. I'm communicating to the editor through you guys. He's sitting here, and I'm saying this one. At the end of the day, this is your career. If you feel like you've done everything and it's still not changing, instead of sitting and be grumpy, you have a better option just leaving the organization. And sometimes we don't exercise that option enough if we've tried everything else. That's why at the end of the day, you must take responsibility for your own career and always be improving your own skill so that you don't feel trapped in places where you think they're just disregarding whatever you are raising. And also, you know, it's very important that those options can also be exercised. So I want to close now by giving the employers, the managers, the leaders some of the ideas. If you are sitting there and thinking, yo, Siphiwe, maybe I didn't even know this deviant workplace behaviors. I didn't know the term, the organizational behavior term that you guys use, but man, I am seeing all the behaviors that you've listed. What are some of my options? What can I do? I'm going to suggest a few and then we'll close. Firstly, try to listen actively. You know, employers should create a culture of open communication where employees feel heard and values. When employees feel like their voice is being muted, that's where it leads to deviant behaviors. So active listening from a part of the leader is very important. Actively listening to employee feedback, to listening to their concerns can help identify issues and address them promptly. If you've called people like Siphiwe Moyo, for example, we've done team effectiveness sessions and employees have raised issues. Please, 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 I'm begging your leaders, never forget to follow up on those. Never forget to make sure that you address those issues. Otherwise, it leads to further disillusionment, where even the people start feeling even the sessions are a waste of time because nothing is going to be done after that. Try your best, number 2, to provide clear expectations. Employers should ensure that employees have a clear understanding of their roles, responsibilities, and performance expectations to avoid misunderstandings and conflict. Please clarify expectations. Be very clear on expectations. Don't say, this month we must improve performance. What does that mean? Improve performance from what to what? Try your best to be very, very clear on expectations. Third, offer growth opportunities. One of the challenges that many people are facing is that sometimes there are no vertical promotional opportunities in the workplace because structures are becoming flatter and flatter. If you don't have promotional opportunities, vertical promotional opportunities, try many other things like job enlargements, where you try and make people's jobs a little bit larger. You delegate some of your responsibilities to them. You rotate them within your team to keep them excited. Those things really do help. Make sure that you implement fair policies, establishing fair and transparent policies and procedures, particularly for things like performance evaluations, promotions, compensation, and other aspects of employment can help prevent allegations of favoritism and discrimination. So try your best to be as objective as you can and set objective criteria for things like recognition, performance evaluations, and so on. Try your best to also promote work-life balance or work-life integration, as we normally say now. Encouraging that integration, that balance through flexible work arrangements, wellness programs, and supportive policies can help reduce the stress of employees and improve well-being. Where possible, always recognize and reward employees. Acknowledge and appreciate employees' hard work. This can contribute to boosting their morale, and their motivation. So acknowledge people, even if you don't have money and incentives, but just to say well done is very, very important. I think provide a safe and inclusive work environment where everybody feels seen, everybody feels like they belong is very, very important. When there are concerns that have been raised, address them promptly. Employers should take employee concerns and complaints seriously and address them promptly, because if people are raising concerns and you do nothing, then it leads to that disillusionment. Encourage feedback and collaboration, and lastly, lead by examples. As a leader, you should demonstrate ethical behavior, should demonstrate professionalism and respect for employees, set a positive example for others to follow, and creating a positive environment. So, ladies and gentlemen, I hope this has been worthwhile. In conclusion, I want to say the interplay between perceived breaches of psychological contract on the one hand and deviant workplace behaviors highlights the importance of maintaining that healthy psychological contract within an organization. By recognizing the impact of these perceived breaches on employee behavior and taking proactive steps to address them, organizations can foster a culture of trust, a culture of respect, and accountability. So I really hope you understand that sometimes when we see these deviant workplace behaviors, it's because employees are retaliating. And instead of you as a leader retaliating as well, use some of the tips that I've given you in this episode to make sure that we clarify expectations and we make sure that we talk. So thank you very much for joining me in this in-depth discussion. I trust that you found it enlightening and thought-provoking. Stay tuned for more insightful explorations of organizational behavior with Siphiwe Moyo. I hope this was worthwhile. See you next time. Bye. I'm out.